Good evening, everyone. Hello, welcome, welcome. My name is Ginger Kanahiro-Saab. I am so pleased to be here with you this evening. I am a native San Franciscan. I went to Sacred Heart Cathedral, and I was on the swim team, and we didn't have a pool. So I actually came to USF 5 days a week, sometimes on the weekend when I got a chance to practice. But USF has a very dear place in my heart because my dad never picked me up on time. So aside from practice, I also actually stayed about a good 2 hours after over by the soccer fields waiting for my ride home. But this evening is a nice homecoming of sorts. I'm sure for many of you, I hear some of you are from out of town, have traveled very far to be here on this special evening where we are inaugurating the Center for Business Studies and Innovation Asia Pacific. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, because it is such a very special night. It took a long time to get here, but here we are. Well, tonight, as I mentioned, marks a huge milestone for the University of San Francisco as it really claims a space in the San Francisco Silicon Valley innovation high-tech corridor, as well as the larger and emerging Asia-Pacific innovation ecosystem. We can talk about the strategic location of San Francisco, where it is when it comes to the Asia-Pacific ecosystem, as well as Silicon Valley. I know we're going to hear a lot about that this evening. And as mentioned, tonight is a big night. We are inaugurating CBSI AP. This new center builds on a legacy that was built by a fabulous team, a dedicated team of bringing Chinese business studies initiative to the entire Asia-Pacific region. Now it will have a broader geographical scope with a focus on innovation in its programming, as well as the university also conferring its new status as a formal academic research center. And I can go on, but I know that someone is going to talk about it from her experience. This is a very dear, dear project initiative that has now become a center. I want to introduce you to someone very dear to all of this. I'd like to call on the founding director of the Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific, who led the China Business Studies Initiative, or CBSI, as a dedicated executive and advisory board through the last 8 years. By the way, I just want to say it's very special that it's CBSI and it's still CBSI. Carry that legacy over. Please put your hands together for Professor Xiaohua Yang. Of course.
I do have a big voice, but maybe not good enough for tonight. With that from Ginger, I think you're all fired up, so I don't know what else I can say now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just super excited to see all of you here to celebrate the new Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific. Yes, you're right, Ginger, you got it. We still call it the CBSI, but at AP, or Asia Pacific, for short. So where did the CBSI AP come from? This is the day that my team and I have been looking forward to for many years. And this is the speech I have been writing for many years as well. 8 years ago, next slide. 8 years ago, 5 of us, I better almost fall over. 5 of us decided to put all our bets together on the joint venture and on the startup. And that was called China Business Studies Initiative. And I would say we beat all the odds, except white hairs, you will see. So for 8 years, and we actually survived and thrived as well. Then we found ourselves called upon to build more bridges and big ones between US and other Asian countries, in addition to China. And since 2019, the team has been very busy working to broaden the scope and broaden the geographical coverage. And so I am super happy to share with you today that CBSI has been transformed from a new venture to a unicorn, quote unquote. We feel that way, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and supporters, from CBSI to CBSI Asia Pacific, we have made it. We have made it. I want to thank Father Paul for making that visionary decision. And I want to thank Provost Chineri for accepting our center proposal. And I want to thank my dean for supporting us. So where is CBSI heading? Our vision is to be a thought leader, knowledge hub, and bridge builder. And we'll transform 3 pillars. First one, innovation-focused research pillar. We have recently launched a new research program studying Asian immigrant entrepreneurs who have contributed, or we believe they have, and we want to dig out stories of those immigrant entrepreneurs, what they actually brought to American society. And of course, there are a lot more. Second, the industry pillar. We are partnering with institutions and companies in US and in Asia to host cutting-edge events. The first event after this launch will be November 2nd, Unicorn Strategies in Southeast Asia, the implications for US and Asian collaborative innovation, followed by our annual China Town Hall, which will be November 16th. Our third pillar is a student pillar, which is a hallmark program. It's called International Student Ambassador Program, or ISAP. And we have countless opportunities for our students. And we will continue to partner with the State Department for the long-term project for global sustainability solution competition for our students. They already won some awards. And so, how can you join the game? Trust us, CBSI is here to stay. Vivian smiling. And is here to change the world through our innovative and cutting-edge programming. Thank you for being part of the CBSI journey in the past and forward. Please invest in us and partner with us, and to create more bridges, not walls. Create more prosperity, not poverty. More peace, not war, in Asia and in other parts of the world. I was given the honor to acknowledge the presence of a few distinguished guests. So please bear with me for a couple of minutes. Honorable Gerardo Barrera, Andrea Fernand, Consul General of Colombia. You can hold. Honorable William Chick, Consul General of Singapore. Honorable Qing Jiang Pan, Deputy Consul General of China, Raquel Solano, Deputy Consul General, Philippines, Honorable Noritoshi Kurakawa, Consul Japan, Ambassador Larry Greenwood, former U.S. Ambassador to APAC. So please put your hands together to welcome. Thank you for being here. Before I hand over the mic, I would like to thank the donors who have supported us all these years. The list is very long. So please allow me to just mention a few names here. Chen Wenyan, founder of HYC, for his visionary gift to help us establish the center. That's 3 years ago. I promised, I delivered. So, Vivian Wan for establishing the first ISEF scholarship. Nora Wu for establishing CBSI Leadership and Innovation Fund. Nora. Marshall Meyer and Guo Wei for generous contribution to the Leadership and Innovation Fund. Marshall somewhere. And David Yin and Kelly Gao for generous contribution to ISEP program. And George Zhao for generous contribution to the CBSI Center Fund. So give them a round of applause. I truly can't thank them enough for what they've done for CBSI all these years. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my team, I want to thank you wholeheartedly for celebrating this special event with us tonight and for being CBSI's true friends. Thank you and enjoy this evening.
All right, let me say that one more time. Thank you so much. What a fabulous address that you welcomed us with. 5 founders turned into this center, into opening up a world of opportunity for students. It's amazing. I think what makes me feel really special to be part of this event is not only is it, of course, a wonderful launch of a new center, but really what it represents when we all collaborate and put our minds together. I wish something was around like it. I was talking to Vice Provost Sheila earlier and saying, I wish there were more options, more opportunities for a global perspective when I was a student. And this is what you're offering here at USF. So congratulations, congratulations. We are now going to take you to the exciting part, the official launching of the Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific. Please allow me to welcome the School of Management's Dean, Dr. Otko Erhemjats.
That was good, thank you. She pronounced my name pretty well. She passed the test. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me for this special occasion. Being an Asian woman, Asian immigrant, this is very special. I'm originally from Mongolia and have been in the US for the last 25 years now. But joined USF this summer in July and have been on the job basically a little less than 3 months. And it's such a privilege to join colleagues like Shawa. She's a force of nature, right? Everyone knows, Shawa knows her energy and drive and passion. So for me, even though I didn't partake in the beginning, all the hard work that Shawa and her team pulled off, I'm lucky to be sharing the launch and sharing the celebration with you all. But the center, the CBSI AP, it's a special center that connects Asia Pacific with the US and city of San Francisco and USF. People tend to think when you say Asia, you know, usually people think of Southeast Asia also. So I think it's part of the center work that we can expand people's understanding beyond that monolith that people think of Asians, right? There are so many different kinds of Asians, including Mongolians, in the Northeast. There are many different kinds of lifestyles and cultures. So I think the beauty of this kind of center and work is kind of generating and distributing knowledge about the Asia-Pacific region, right? And beyond and across cultural and disciplinary boundaries. So that's the part that I'm really excited about. And it's going to be providing a lot of academic and research projects for our students, for our faculty, for our community partners. So it's going to be the impact of the center is very impactful. And some of the members have already started interviewing some Asian entrepreneurs and already starting to hear amazing stories. So I'm very thankful to be part of this journey, and thank you for coming, and thank you for all the donors and supporters for all the support that you've provided so far. So thank you, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Dean Otko. Speaking of when she mentioned the monolith of Asia, that is people's perception. When I was a student, I wanted to study in the Philippines. My family is from the Philippines, and I wanted to take that semester abroad. And one of the counselors at the university that I went to said, "Oh, well, we have a program in Japan." And I was like, "Oh, that's wonderful. I would love to visit Japan. I would love to live in Japan, but I think your response, doesn't fit what I was looking for." And I am just thrilled to, anyways, that was my personal experience with that. I hope nobody's saying that, obviously, at this center. So yes, all right. Well, we are continuing on. I'm going to stop blabbing because now it's time for me to call on the university provost and the vice president of academic affairs to say a few words. Please welcome Provost Shinye Opera. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Chinyere Opara. I'm the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs. Ginger, thank you so much for the beautiful energy that you bring to us. We're so blessed by your presence today. I want to start out by giving a special welcome to our students. You are the most important people in the room. You're why we are here. So just wave if you're a student, and we want to acknowledge you. We want to also, thank you. We want to welcome our alumni. Thank you for coming back, for being so loyal. You always show up to all of these events, and it means so much to us. Our faculty, our librarians, our staff, our administrators, you are working so hard every day to give our students an extraordinary experience. Thank you for being here. And I particularly want to thank all of the organizing committee for this event. And I'm just going to call out your names and just get you to wave so that we can just lift you up, because sometimes we don't have enough appreciation around here. Not just at USF, but in the world, I think, at large. We're all working incredibly hard and not getting the appreciation we need. So let's just acknowledge Vivian, Danielle, Wayne, Mario, Tanya, Diana, Jeff, and Michelle. Thank you for organizing this beautiful event. So as you heard, the China Business Studies Initiative was founded back in 2014. And we had this incredible group of individuals who came together with a vision to create cultural understanding, to create global opportunity, and to create an opportunity for our students to experience themselves as global citizens. Really an exciting vision, and a real focus on building a deep and meaningful relationship with partners in industry, both here and in China. And they did such incredible work that things moved on. But I want to say a little bit about why I think they have been able to achieve quite so much. And I think a part of that is the person who has been described here tonight as a force of nature. And I don't think that that's untrue. Professor Xiaohua Yang. Professor Xiaohua is really an extraordinary leader. She's an extraordinary faculty member. Oftentimes we think of faculty members as in the classroom teaching their students, grading, perhaps giving the students a bit of a hard time, and I'm sure you probably do that. But she's also really an entrepreneur. You heard her talk about this as a startup. This really was a startup, and she had the vision, she had the partnership and the collaboration, and she went and she talked to you. Now, who has had the experience of Xiaohua asking you to do something, whether it's speaking on a panel, mentoring a student, hosting? Yeah, okay. So you will know, for the rest of you, if she comes your way to ask you something, just say yes at the beginning, because you're going to say yes at the end anyway, so you may as well spare yourself. Shawa is fired up. She is passionate, and she is an incredible visionary leader, and we're just so grateful to you, and we're very blessed at the University of San Francisco that you have chosen to make this your home. And so this institute, this initiative that became a center. So a little over a year ago, I arrived at the University of San Francisco, and one of the first people to reach out to me and say, I want to come and talk to you about something was Professor Shawa. And actually, she didn't come asking for anything. What they do at first is they bring you a gift. She came bearing gifts, and we talked, and we went for a long walk, and we discussed the vision here. And the thing that really caught my attention was the International Student Ambassador Program. This is an incredible program that allows our students to learn about how they can create change in the world beyond US borders. Right? Oftentimes, our students have an experience of being raised here and seeing themselves as Americans. We want them to understand that your concerns, the experiences and issues that impact you go far beyond the borders of the United States. And in fact, this is a global world. Pretty much any social problem, any environmental problem that we're dealing with will extend beyond the US borders. And when we think about Asia and the Pacific, it's a critical area and a really strategic area for our students to have experience around. And so we had the opportunity to go to the beautiful home of our trustee, Nora Wu, and hear from some of our students sharing their experiences. And I was so excited, and I said, we have to do more. When Shawa came to me and said, you know, what do you think about expanding us beyond China to a broader vision of Asia and the Pacific? I said, this is the moment. We're about collaborations, we're about partnerships, we're about extending beyond a narrow vision. It was important to lean in to that and start where we know, right? But now we actually want to recognize more. We have over 900 Asian students here at the University of San Francisco. It's critically important that we give them an opportunity from wherever they are in the region to feel a part of, to feel a sense of belonging, and then to partner and to share their experiences, their journeys with our non-Asian students. So I'm just couldn't be more delighted to be here today celebrating with you all. I know many of you have had a much longer relationship to the center than I have, and so I have to thank you for your commitment, for your support, and I know that you will continue to support us as we move into the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Provost Shinieri. Yes, I'm 2 for 2. No, I'm just kidding. What a powerful message. Really, everything that you said just resonates so well. Thank you. Now let us move on to the highly anticipated fireside chat. I would like to call on Mr. Kerr Gibbs, the School of Management Executive in Residence and the immediate past president of AmCham Shanghai. Hi, Kerr. Mr. Gibbs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ginger. Thank you. And I have to say, the provost is absolutely right. Just say yes first with Professor Yang and save yourself the trouble. The other thing is you're going to have to move at a pretty fast pace with Professor Yang, otherwise you will have tire tracks down your back. So get out of her way. She's really making things happen. I'm just going to say a couple words. We're already behind schedule, but I'm just going to say a couple words about what we're going to experience tonight. We're not going to have a presentation. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have the opportunity to listen in on a conversation between two very interesting people that I'll tell you about in just a minute. But first, I want to follow on what Professor Yang was talking about, and she's already explained kind of the vision of CBSI. But what we thought we would do with the event tonight is really give you an example of what we are trying to do at CBSI. What we are doing here is quite literally bringing a conversation to the campus. We are bringing a conversation to USF. We're going to tap into all of the amazing resources that we have around the Bay Area and beyond, and bringing those resources here to USF so that our students and scholars can get the benefit of that knowledge and insight about Asia, especially about that corridor between Asia and the United States. So we'll be looking at business issues, investment, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship. So we're going to bring all of that to the center for the benefit of our students. So that's really this is quite literally an example of what we want to do at CBSI. So, so why have we picked these particular individuals, and what do we mean by this big question of, you know, sea change and the Asia century and all of that? I'm a China specialist, and I've spent most of my career looking at China issues and business issues in Asia Pacific. I'm often asked, hey, Kerr, what is China going to be like in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? What I often answer is that's actually the wrong question. A much better question is, what is the world going to look like in the next 5 years with China in it? China is so large, it's so dynamic, and recently it's so aggressive that it literally changes everything that it touches. So that's really the background to why CBSI really has to expand beyond China to look at issues surrounding China, the Asia Pacific, and again, this corridor between Asia and the United States. So that's why we've asked these two people. They have deep experience throughout Asia Pacific, but especially in two regions that are just adjacent to China. In the case of Japan, and then also in Hong Kong. So with that, I want to bring my two good friends up to the stage. We have Mr. Ambassador Larry Greenwood, who has a long and very distinguished career in the U.S. government. He was, as Professor Yang mentioned, he was the ambassador to APEC. That's the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. Is that right? So we're very happy to have him, and he's also currently the president of the Japan Society. With him, we have Ms. Tara Joseph. She has a long and very distinguished career as a journalist. And most recently, she just stepped down as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. And so I'm going to turn over to Tara, and I very much look forward to listening in on your conversation. Thank you so much.
Kerr, thank you very much, and wonderful to be here. Larry, are you comfortable and cozy by the fire?
I am.
Because we have a really big assignment in the next 30 minutes, and that is to whiz through, is the future Asia? That's a big one. So I'm just going to start with this thought. It was back in 1985 when Asia was really starting to emerge in terms of population and economics that people started saying the next century, the century we're in now, is going to be the Asia century. Things are going to change. There's going to be a very big development there, and the West will eventually be overtaken. So now we're about a quarter of the way through the so-called Asian century. How's it panning out? Is this really going to be the century for Asia?
Well, first, let me thank you, Tara, for that question, but also thanks to Professor Yang, who did indeed ask me, and I said yes immediately, sensing that was the right answer. But congratulations again to the center. My view is actually that the century, Asia century, in some ways is already here. In terms of economic weight, certainly it's here because Asia as a region, in terms of just a simple measure such as GDP, surpassed the US and Europe as the largest regional economy in the world. That was 10 years ago. So in some ways, in terms of economic weight, they're already there. But when you start talking about overtaking and dominance, that's another kind of another story. In a sense, it's basically they've been the U.S. hasn't fallen. I mean, we've also have grown our economy. We're a very dynamic economy. Keep in mind that GDP in those 20 years from 2000 to this year tripled. World GDP tripled. So we're talking about a much bigger economy in the whole world. Asia is a bigger part of that, but obviously the U.S. is still a very dynamic part of it. So right now, Asia accounts for about 40% of world GDP. That's up from 25% of what it was 20 years ago. So again, a lot of growth. A lot of that is China, clearly, but not all. So Southeast Asia has been growing very fast. And India, thanks to reforms that go back all the way to the 1990s, has also been growing, and now under Prime Minister Modi has been doing quite well. I put that down to two main factors, and again, the United States should have some pride in this. The first one is that there exists a a rules-based trade and investment regime that allows for increased trade and investment, protects it, and the U.S. was very much the leader in creating that international system, of global open trade and investment. We benefited from it, and Asia in particular benefited from that system. But Asia could only benefit by doing the second thing, which is that they had to undertake reforms. They had to open up their markets. They had to take market reforms in their countries. They had to improve their fiscal and monetary policy to be able to take advantage of that system of open trade and investment, and that's what they did. Asia, even in the year 2000, on their average tariff rates, and this includes China, by the way, were well below 10%. So actually, Asia has been undertook market-oriented reforms quite early in the 1990s, mainly, and they benefited from that. So I know that's a little bit different story than you may have heard from our former president, but that's the history of how this happened. Now, we're now in a big area of big change because some of those two factors maybe are a little bit up in the air, right? Is the U.S. is supportive of free trade and investment as it used to be? Well, obviously, in the last administration, we saw a step backwards. This administration, there's still some questions. Are the Asian countries, including China, as open to market-oriented reforms as they used to be? Again, big question. So some of those fundamental factors that resulted in what has been historic growth. I mean, hundreds of millions of people taken out of poverty, never been done since the beginning of history of mankind. Some of that may be undermined by these new trends. And then you have other trends that we'll talk about, climate, demography. There's lots of challenges for Asia. So I think we're in the Asia century. Will it continue in the same way? I hope so, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, it's really important to think about trade, obviously, as we become more of a global world. I just want to put a bit of a people perspective on it. It's very easy to take a snapshot and look at the tremendous growth that we've seen, the money that's being made, the wealth that's being generated in Asia. But on a people note, there are two issues that concern me greatly, and one is the demographic proposition. So if you look at Asia, there was what was called a population bulge back in the late century, where there were many births. India and China obviously took over as the most populous nation, and all across Asia we saw young people, children and babies. Now we're getting to a point, as you probably experienced in Japan in particular, where we have aging populations, a huge issue in North Asia. And we are also now starting to see in many other parts of Asia that people aren't having children anymore. Hong Kong was one such place. As you go south now throughout Asia, you see that people are not having children the way they used to. So where are we going to be by the end of this century? We could well have a very old population in the most populous region on Earth. And I think that's something that people will need to take into account in terms of innovation, in terms of business, and in terms of what the planet's going to look like. That also leads to natural resources and a skew of population. The other thing that I want to bring up is the wealth gap in Asia. Now we see a wealth gap in the United States, which is obviously very disturbing. But coming from Hong Kong, where I lived for many years in particular, the wealth gap is extreme, as it is in India, as it is in many parts of Asia as you head south. That wealth gap is remaining. It's not being erased. And what's that going to lead to in politics, in economic devastation, and also in terms of conflict? And that's something that really concerns me greatly as we continue on in this Asian century.
In fact, I would, you know, there's a hypothesis, and I think it needs to be studied, maybe the center could do it, that in fact that income and wealth inequality, both in the United States as well as in China, is one of the major domestic factors that is in fact pushing back on this traditional consensus that both countries have had to be more open and to, you know, be more global. Because that certainly is what's happening here, and I think it's also happening in China. So it's, that's, I think, a very significant factor behind what we're seeing today.
Where do you think the biggest opportunities lie for those who will collaborate and work across the world in the next generation?
Well, let me start off with a maybe a counterintuitive country, but one that's close to my heart, which is Japan. And I think it gets overlooked because obviously the growth rates in Japan have, the nominal growth rates for GDP have not been that impressive, 1% to 2% for the last couple of decades. On a per capita basis, however, they've had steady growth because, of course, the population is in fact shrinking in Japan. It's now less than it was 10 years ago. But it's still a very dynamic economy and still it's very rich. And it's important to keep in mind that, you know, Japan is the only rich, big economy in Asia. Because, you know, people still, you know, they may think of China as a big, rich country. It's not rich yet. It's still a just barely out of middle income country level. It's per capita GDP is maybe 1/3 of Japan's. So still got a long way to go. And so Japan is the only rich, big economy in Asia. And it's a huge market, so American business can't ignore it. It's a huge market for both goods and services. And it's, again, overlooked in many ways. The other kind of opportunities, I mean, obviously China is the big prize, right? So any business has to look at China. As Kerr said, when you're that big, you're going to get attention, and it's rightfully so. And a lot of American companies have done very well, but I'm not going to talk too much about China because Tara is much more an expert on that. But I think, you know, there's still, recently there's been, obviously with the U.S.-China conflict, there's been some questions about, you know, our ability to do business there. And difficulties of market access. I worked for a company that had a joint venture in China, MetLife Insurance, and doing very well. We liked working in the Chinese market, and we're very pleased that, in fact, just recently China opened up that market even more to foreign insurers. So now that we can actually own 100% of our business there. So there are definitely bright spots, but there are, you know, less bright spots. Most of the companies here, the tech companies in Silicon Valley, where we live, can't do business in China, and so you know, that's obviously something that's a concern. The other big thing I would point out, and I think it was Xiaohua said it earlier, the startup picture in Asia is really, really interesting. And this is relatively new, and so it's, you know, we're seeing startups now, of course, in China, which has a great startup ecosystem. Again, some questions about what's happened recently and what that means for startup community and entrepreneurship in China is a legitimate question to ask, and we're all watching that very closely. But there's still some great startups in China. There's great startups in Singapore, in Malaysia. Indonesia has a really fast-growing startup community. And really interesting places for, in particular, the Bay Area to cooperate in that startup ecosystem.
I've had the distinct pleasure, sometimes exhausting pleasure, of traveling around Asia nonstop when I was a journalist for about 15 years. And I have two picks in terms of countries where I think we've seen stunning and really interesting development. And again, I will take China out of the picture because it sucks so much air out of the room. It has its own incredible changes and growth and development. The first one for me is Vietnam. The changes in Vietnam, it's opening up to the world. It's building a whole new manufacturing base. It's recovering from an incredibly disruptive and painful war. It's educating a new generation. I'm just blown away by the changes that take place in Vietnam every single time I've gone back after 6 months. And then the next 6 months, you can feel the incredible change and vibrancy and development that's going on there. And it's opened up to all sorts of opportunities, including the move of the supply chain away from being so focused on China and really taken it and moved ahead. So I think that's an incredible place to look for opportunities and ideas. The second one has got to be Singapore as a pick. When I lived in Hong Kong, we used to make fun of Singapore, slow Singapore. And I hope I'm not being rude to anyone in the room. Sleepapore is what the Hong Kongers would call it, and this and that. Singapore is humming. Singapore has stolen Hong Kong's lunch in the last few years in terms of its ability to recruit international businesses, in terms of its look into urban development and how to build a beautiful urban campus for its residents, in terms of the diversity that Singapore has, and in the ability to hold on to its own national identity. I find it incredible. And it's been really interesting to watch how they've seized that opportunity, not without struggle, not without its difficulties, but those are two areas which show that smaller countries within Asia, when they unite together and really look and collaborate and think of opportunities for the future, can really, really shine. So it's been incredible to watch that. Let's look on the glass half empty side. What do you think are the biggest risks for people who are looking to do business in Asia, or for Asia in this century that we're calling the Asia century?
Yeah, and by the way, I think Vietnam and Singapore are two great picks. I lived in Singapore in the early '90s, and Singapore has had also a really important influence in that story that I just told you about, the growth story of Asia, because they were the first country in Southeast Asia to say, multinational corporations, come, invest here. Now, people forget in the 70s and 80s, most developing countries were anti-MNC, right? They were very much anti-multinationals. There were horrendous anti-Japanese riots in Jakarta and in Indonesia, protesting Japanese investment in the economy there. But Singapore said no. Yeah, come here. And then everyone else looked at how rich Singapore got, and they said, we want some of that too. So it's an important dynamic. Yeah, on the challenges side, I think there's some short-term challenges for sure, which are obviously the big one now is inflation, and because of the Federal Reserve's actions to raise interest rates, the impact that's having on economies in terms of financial flows in Asia, on debt levels in Asia, and also on economic growth. And since Asia does still very much depend on growth in the American and European markets, that's going to be that short-term question about how they can handle those changes and the adjustments that are going to be needed. Now, I'm actually pretty optimistic that Asia is going to do pretty well with that particular challenge. I think inflation is not so far a huge problem in Asia. And because of the reforms that Asian countries took after the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, their fiscal and monetary policy and foreign exchange policies are also quite sound. So it'll be rough. It'll be a rocky road, but I think they'll make it through that challenge. The next one is supply chain shifts and supply chain disruptions. Now, actually, this might actually be more of an opportunity. You mentioned Vietnam as actually benefiting from the supply chain shifts out of China, and I think that's exactly right. But there'll be other, disruptions and changes. Again, there'll be adjustments that'll be needed to make. So actually, again, I think in the short term, I think the big short-term problem that the region will struggle with is the U.S.-China conflict, because they're going to be under pressure from both to take sides, and obviously, particularly Southeast Asia is not going to want to do that, and they're going to they have a chance of being caught in the battle between the two elephants. And so that's going to be a challenge about how they stay that course. I think one of the positive features of that is that, at least on the U.S. side, that I think the Biden administration is not going to make them have to take that choice. I think Biden will probably give them some leeway to have that middle road, not necessarily take a position. Particularly as he helps kind of working with them on these new initiatives that he has going in Asia. So again, I'm hopeful that will work out okay particularly for the Southeast Asian countries. But the long term, so the short term probably okay. Long term challenges are going to be the real issue, and you raised the first one, which is demographics. So keep in mind China, South Korea, and Japan account for 80% of GDP in Asia, right? That includes India. So a lot of that wealth is in those three countries. All three countries are old. And Japan is shrinking. Korea is going to start shrinking very soon. China will start shrinking pretty soon. And that is has a huge set of problems, including how do you support old people when you have a smaller working population? How do you have enough laborers to manufacture? How do you deal with debt levels? Where the debt just keeps spiraling. Japan's debt is to 250% of GDP. So these are big issues. But again, I'm an optimist, as you could probably tell. I think there's also some interesting things that come out of this because, in a way, those three countries, particularly Japan and Korea, which are going to be at the head of it, are basically laboratories for what the world is going to need to do. Because population will eventually plateau in the world. I mean, the UN says it's going to be close to the end of the century. Some people are saying more like 2050, 2060 might plateau. It depends on how fast we educate women. That's the number one determinant of birth rates. Educated women don't have as many children. And so if you educate women, your population will go down. And that's the way it works. So the rest of us are going to be in the same boat eventually. So let's see how they do it, so we can learn and make this transition more smoothly. It's not a bad thing, right? The world population can't keep on going forever. I'm sorry, the last one was climate change, but I won't get into it because I want to hear you start.
Yeah, climate change is tough with half an hour, but obviously a huge issue as it is for us. I never expected San Francisco to be so warm today. I agree with much of what you're saying, but politics really does have to stand out in terms of a really fractured region. ASEAN was supposed to be building a unified region, and ASEAN is having all sorts of trouble, even just putting together a conference and an event in terms of who has the highest standing, who's going to talk to who, which government is going to get along with which government. And unless Asian countries can find a way to unite the way unbelievably European countries did, the way unbelievably the states in the United States did, that's going to leave Asia in a difficult situation. Especially the smaller countries need each other for trade, growth, and development. And that also leads to the other sense of corruption. And I think corruption has a lot to do with that in terms of trade and in terms of political leaders who may at times be thinking of their own opportunities as opposed to working with their partners across Asia. So a big one. Now we probably are almost out of time, so I'm just going to bring up a little thing called China. The elephant in the room in terms of how Asia's developing, and ask, this is a tough one for a crystal ball, how is Asia going to develop with this one massive, as Kerr suggested, aggressive economy coming into the fore and really shaping the way trade is across the region and politics as well?
Yeah, so I don't have a crystal ball on China, obviously, but I would go back maybe 10 years when China was putting together its various 5-year plans. And I was actually involved in one of them when I was at the Asian Development Bank. We were inside the process of developing the 5-year plan. And I was really impressed with the ability of the Chinese government officials. NDRC obviously was the lead agency, at very accurately, being able to analyze what the problems were, what was the constraints to growth, what were some of the social, economic, social economic policies that were needed to take China to the next stage of development, and then and kind of watching how and obviously every economy has its political. The politics of economic policy are obviously very difficult in every country. And so the ability of China to execute this policy that I thought was an excellent policy, which is basically, just by the way, to reduce its dependence on exports to drive growth, and also reduce its dependence on investment in infrastructure, and have more domestic consumption drive growth. And actually, in ways to become more like America, frankly, that's kind of the way our economy is modeled, and actually China was on trajectory to do that. But in the last few years, that is now open to question. So obviously the current president does not have that vision, and has a different vision of how to develop China. And we'll just have to kind of see if it works. And so there is I will say quite frankly, I think I'm skeptical that it will work, and this will be that China will be able to return to the dynamic growth that we saw before. And by the way, I'm not a guy who says China's got to have 10% growth every year. That's actually a very silly number. We in ADB, when I was there, we did an analysis, and we actually came up with the thought that 5% was actually the kind of potential growth rate of China, which makes a lot more sense. And so 5% is, and that's probably doable, although this year it will be much lower than that. But I guess what I'm saying is that I think China, the real issue here is kind of whether China's domestic policy, is it going to continue the route to market-oriented reforms, having a stronger private sector, more open economy, or is it going to go, state economy, more closed, less market dynamism? And I think that's still an open question. We just don't know. I mean, I think that debate, even though many people think that debate is over, I do not believe it is over, and I think it's still going on in China. And in terms of the rest of the region, I think China is going to be the center of Asia. There's just no way getting around it. Now, maybe we're hoping India someday will also be another economic hub and a source of growth for the region as well. But not today. It still needs to make a lot of changes internally to do that. But China is definitely going to be that hub. It's going to be an important part of what every country has to do, and every country has to wake up every morning. And this is what influence means: is wake up every morning, and one of the first things they need to think about is, so what does China think about what I'm going to do today? And that's just comes with the territory. And America, that's where we were as well, and still are. I mean, America and China are going to be the two world economic leaders, and we just have to find ways of doing it together.
I think you're right. I'll sum it up by saying big adjustment. I call myself a recovering Hong Konger. It's been a very volatile 5 years watching the changes that have taken place there. And for many people, including myself, it is the adjustment of recognizing that China is a very important force in shaping how people will live across Asia, even if they're next door in Hong Kong. It's, for some people, an adjustment that means there'll be more opportunities, there'll be more money generated, there'll be a bigger Asia. But for many other people, it's a huge adjustment of how the world could look. And that leads us to where the United States and China are now. So lots for the next generation to think of, and I'm really glad we've had the opportunity to discuss it. I'd love to come back and hear what the students think and what they're going to do. Thank you for listening to us, and Larry, thanks very much.
Thank you, Tara.
For all your great thoughts. I'll pass it back to Kerr.
Thank you both. What a fascinating conversation, and I really look forward to having many more conversations like this with CBSI as a center. I had no idea we were going to talk so much about demographics because, again, being in the region surrounding China, within China, we talk about it a lot. is that within China, believe it or not, there's a labor shortage in the world's most populous country, because the labor force has literally been shrinking since 2012, and has had that same impact on costs as they go up. If you're willing to stick around, I'm sure a lot of people have questions for you. If you're willing to stick around, we can just do that on an individual basis as we serve drinks and whatnot. But let me just ask one question to sum up. If I could ask each of you, what's your advice to CBSI as we launch the new center? What should we be thinking about? What should we be guarding against? What are your thoughts for us?
I was just hugely excited to hear about the Young Ambassador Program. I think that people collaborating, young people going out and learning about the world and collaborating with other countries is so important. Added to that, COVID has done a huge amount of damage over the last few years in people not going places and meeting each other. So just in the US-China frame, along with the chill and different issues and difficult aspects that we've had in terms of understanding in politics and economics, people who used to know each other personally, people from Washington who would go and see Kerr in Shanghai, or people who had friends in Beijing that they could talk about important issues about quietly, have not been able to meet face to face. Students who studied languages and hoped that someday they'd be able to go abroad and use those languages and become an ambassador and join the foreign service or be a business person have not been able to do that. So collaboration and getting out into the world and understanding each other, especially for the younger generation, I think is so important and so amazing that you're doing that already. Very exciting.
Yeah, in terms of kind of areas that I would hope the center would look at, the topics, Tara mentioned the lack of institutional kind of regional institutions, not the lack of number, but lack of quality of regional institutions in Asia is an issue. And I was obviously worked with one of them at APEC, although that's of course one that U.S. is involved in. I think looking at the institutional arrangements that are developing, we have there's lots of different trade organizations or trade groups now that are coming up. There's a whole alphabet, RCEP, IPEF. I could go on for a long time, but no one wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But it's studying those I think is important. And by the way, just to put a pitch in, the U.S. is hosting APEC next year, and so please get involved in that. Actually, the center could as well. We're hoping that some of those events will take place here in California, hopefully some in the Bay Area, so we're looking forward. When APEC involves literally hundreds of meetings every year in the host country, so there's going to be lots of opportunities to be involved in that. The second one I would say is supply chain. So supply chain is obviously being fractured. It's the information about supply chains is actually still pretty sparse. I mean, frankly, even the companies themselves, beyond their secondary suppliers, don't even know their own supply chains, much less the academics that study it. And so I think delving into that and figuring out where the supply chains are now located, what the network is, but also more importantly how they're shifting. Because we talk about the shift to Vietnam, and we know about it episodically, but there's really very little empirical work that's being done there. So I think that's an interesting area to work in. And then finally, I would say demographics. I mean, and the demographics, it's a double picture, right? So you have Northeast Asia, which has the labor shortages, but you do have Southeast Asia, many of those countries, not Singapore obviously, but Philippines, Indonesia that have surplus labor. And actually are benefiting from a demographic, plus. And so the interesting question is, how does Northeast Asia work with Southeast Asia and India to take advantage of that imbalance? And I don't mean necessarily by immigration. Immigration may be part of it, but that's going to be a small part of the solution. I think most of it's going to be investment and trade ties are the way that you eventually resolve that, because that's the growth will come from where the labor surpluses are. but the capital needs to come from where the aging society is. And so there's that connection is going to be the key.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Again, on behalf of CBSI, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand back to our lovely hostess, Ginger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, what a fascinating chat. I was listening intently throughout the whole thing. Please invite me to future chats. I would love to just listen in and hear everyone's perspective. That was wonderful. At this point, we are reaching the end of our program. It's now time to call the university president, Father Paul Fitzgerald, for the conferment of the new center and his closing message. Father Paul.
So, Ginger Conejo Saab, thank you so much for moderating this evening's event. It's too late now, but had you come here as an undergraduate, you could have minored in Filipino studies. You know, worked on your Tagalog. So, okay, good. This inauguration of the Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific is a wonderful occasion for us to reaffirm the values of the University of San Francisco, which has been looking to Asia and receiving Asians for more than a century. Chan Si Wing, born here, but to parents coming from Canton, entered USF Law School in 1916 in the inaugural class. He was the first Chinese American to be admitted to the bar in California. He sued the San Francisco Police Department 30 times for the harassment of merchants in Chinatown. He lost every single one of those cases, but he never gave up. He did live long enough to see his daughter graduate from USF Law. He didn't live long enough to see Heather Fong, another USF alumna, inaugurated as chief of police in San Francisco. That would have been, you know, the cure of all of that. We are here in the Masagong Graduate School of Management, Putra Masagong, Singapore and Jakarta. USF alumnus, father of 2 USF alums, brother of a USF alum, uncle of many USF alums. Putra, former member of the Board of Trustees, has invested in the School of Management. I met with him this summer in Singapore, and as he did a few years back, he's going to host an alumni event. We have more than 300 alums living in Jakarta. So if any of you were there in Jakarta, you can come by the Pullman Hotel. It'll be the party of the century, I promise. We have 6,000 USF alums living in Asia, and many have done amazingly well. I was recently in Seoul this past summer, and I had a nice meeting with Oisin Chung. Oisin Chung did his master's in business administration here. His father has finally stepped back, and Oisin has stepped forward. He is the global chairman of Hyundai. And Hyundai, I might remind you, is a family-owned company. He came over here, the family sent him here to run the Kia factory over in Fremont. And while he was here, he and his wife recently married, and so he came and did his MBA here at USF. Another amazing USF alum is Sean Wei Jian. Sean Wei Jian, he's got a really good book I highly recommend it called Out of the Gobi. There's a whole chapter on his USF career. Cultural Revolution happened, interrupted his education in China. He sent out to the Gobi Desert. To this day, he cannot stand the smell of pumpkins, because that's all they had to eat. Cultural Revolution ends, he returns, finishes his college, and then wants to come to California. So he applies to MBA programs, and he's admitted to 3 MBA programs. And so he takes the letters to his old professor, his former professor, at Beijing University, and says, which one should I go to? He looks at the first letter, and it says, Leland Stanford Junior Memorial University. Well, you don't want to go to a junior college. This is true. I swear to God. It's in the book. It's in the book. The second letter was from the University of California branch campus at Berkeley. Well, you don't want to go to a branch campus. University of San Francisco. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. So he came here, and it's a really wonderful read. He didn't know that you had to pay money to go to a private university in the United States. And so he ran out of money very quickly. His faculty had fallen in love with him. And his professors, out of their own wallets, were putting money into his student account. For our students here today, don't count on that. Although it could happen. And while he was here then, he got a terrific education. He did go on to get his PhD. He taught at Wharton. He and Dick Blum, he and Richard Blum had become very good friends. They were business partners for many years. Wei Jinshan is back in Hong Kong. He's been in Hong Kong. He has a company, PAG, and he's been mostly investing in the Chinese domestic consumer market, and he's done quite well. Also in Singapore, I got to visit with our alumnus, Arthur Tay. Arthur Tay builds mega yacht harbors all over the world, you know, so people with that unequal distribution of wealth and the 150-foot long yachts, they need a place to park. So Arthur rebuilds marinas so that these big mega yachts have a place to dock. Agnes Chen. Agnes Chen came here, studied business, went back and opened a series of men's clothing stores across southern China. And she recently sold it to a manufacturer outside of Shanghai, but she's been kept on to manage this company. An amazing entrepreneurial spirit. And the last, and maybe my favorite USF alum from China is Nora Wu. Nora came to us from Shanghai as a young woman, then studied business administration here at the University of San Francisco. Was a very successful student. Entered into the world of accounting and finance and management, rose to the level of vice president for Asia Pacific from PricewaterhouseCoopers. So a wonderfully successful professional career, and currently now a member of our board of trustees with her husband John's generous support. He gives us a lot of her time and talent and energy. But these people really symbolize the bridge between the University of San Francisco and Asia Pacific. I was in Myanmar, and there's a country where, you know, just after the trade embargo was lifted, you know, everything was on the upswing, and we were getting a dozen young people every year coming from Yangon, and now it's been plunged back into chaos. And I pray that, you know, soon they'll have the reemergence of a rule of law, because it's an amazingly talented population. And a people that are hungry for freedom and for their rights. So tonight we are gathered to celebrate the launch of the CBSI Asia Pacific. I would like to invite Xiaohua Yang, our director, and then the co-chairs, Dr. Marshall Mayer and Nora Wu, up to the stage, please. I think there's, yeah.
It's okay. John's
Please. So we can unveil the name. There's no secret here. And then I believe there's a plaque.
Plaque is not here yet.
Oh, there's no plaque.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will come tomorrow.
Okay. Imagine I'm holding a plaque. The plaque reads, "In recognition of the establishment of the University of San Francisco Center for Business Studies and Innovation in Asia Pacific, as conferred by me on September 29th in the year of our Lord 2022. Congratulations.
Thank you.